Hi, everybody, and welcome back to part two of this week's lecture. And what we're going to be looking at today are going to be prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. What we're going to try to accomplish is we're going to go ahead and define exactly what cell theory is going to be. And we're also going to look and compare and contrast the different structures within prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. So again, we're going to go ahead and define exactly what they are, exactly what's going on with them, and then we're going to look at some of the similarities they have and some of the differences they have. And based upon those similarities and differences, we're going to look at what kind of organisms they produce and what they make. So before we can go ahead and really start looking at the differences and similarities, we need to go ahead and take a couple steps back and we need to look at the fundamental units of life. So if you can go ahead and think back to one of our very first lectures, we went ahead and talked about the levels of organization. And all this basically means is we're starting from something very, very tiny and we're working our way all the way up to something very, very big. So you can see in our progression of the class, we went ahead and started with atoms. Remember, those are going to be very, very tiny, one of the fundamental building blocks of life. We looked at what the atoms are. We looked at the different types of elements. We looked at how to read them. We looked at the protons, neutrons, electrons, all of those things and how they kind of come together in order to make those unique elements and give them their characteristics. Then we went ahead and looked at our molecules when you add them all together, exactly what's going on with that, how they bind with each other. And again, depending on how they bind with each other, gives them those unique characteristics as well. Then we went ahead and looked at how those molecules added together give us macromolecules. Remember, macromolecules are very important because they are going to help sustain life. We have our proteins, our carbohydrates, our lipids, and then our nucleic acids. And as you know, we have our monomers, we have our polymers. Again, in order to build life and in order to give us those resources in order to sustain life. So now what we're going to do is we're moving on to our cells. And there's going to be two different types that we're going to be looking at. And we're going to also look at two different types of organisms that utilize those different types of cells. Our first are going to be our bacteria, and these are going to be unicellular organisms, meaning that there's only going to be one. The smallest absolute thing you can have when it comes to a living thing is just one cell. Then, as we move up into our multicellular organisms, like the name suggests, multicellular, there's going to be multiple cells. We're going to go ahead and be able to take these cells to produce tissues. We're going to take those tissues and create organs, take those organs and create organisms, which ultimately can give us people. So again, a cell is the smallest structural functional unit of an organism. And these are typically going to be microscopic, meaning that you can't really see them with the naked eye. You need to employ a microscope in order to see some of these finer details. And again, cells are going to be the building blocks of all organisms. So you need to have at least one cell in order to be alive. And then you can have multicellular organisms when you take a lot of those cells and add them together. So again, living organisms are either multicellular or they can be unicellular. So let's go ahead and check out what cell theory is essentially going to be. Now, this is going to be an underlying principle of biology. And the main thing you got to get from this is cells are just basic units of life. So again, we need cells in order to kind of build life. If you look at this tree of life over here, you can see we have all of these different organisms. You can see we have the origin of life here, and then you can see all these separate different branching pieces all the way around. And you'll notice all of these branching pieces all have something in common. And what they have in common is they are all made of cells. So again, all living things are made of these cells. And one thing is all cells come from pre-existing cells. So this is going to be an important piece to remember. And basically what this means is whenever you were going through mitosis and we go through cell division, we're taking our original piece and we're dividing it out to make more cells. So again, all cells come from pre-existing cells. Again, if we have one piece here and we go through mitosis, we're going to go ahead and divide it out and we're going to end up with two cells now. And then if they go ahead and divide, 2, 2, 2, 2, now we have 4 cells. So again, this is what they mean by all cells come from pre-existing cells. We have original cell, they're going to divide out and they're going to produce more. So again, the main idea to kind of get from cell theory is cells are the basic unit of life. You need to have at least one cell in order to be alive. And all living organisms are made of these cells, and they all come from pre-existing pieces. Now, if we go ahead and take a look at this and continue, we have about 8.7 million species on the planet. And all of these living organisms are either going to be prokaryotic cells, or they can either be eukaryotic cells. So again, all living things, all of these 8.7 million species, different types of species, are all going to be or contain one of these cells, either prokaryotic or eukaryotic cells. Now, there's a couple important things to remember when it comes to prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. And this right here, these root words, will be able to help you kind of understand what they mean. Now, when it comes to prokaryotic cell, we need to go ahead and identify exactly what these mean and break it apart. So we can see we have the word prokaryotic. Pro means before, so we'll go ahead and separate this part out. So before, and then karyo, right here, karyo, is going to mean kernel or nut. And basically all that kind of means is that it's referring to a nucleus. So in this case, prokaryotic means before a nucleus. Or in this case, you can remember it as pro equals no, meaning that prokaryotic cells do not have a nucleus. And you can go and see this diagram over here, that this is an example of a prokaryotic cell. You can see that they're going to be very tiny. They're going to be about 1 nano to 10 nanometers. And you can see that right in the middle, there is not going to be a nucleus. It just has its genetic information surrounded by a cytoplasm. Now, when it comes to eukaryotic cells, EU equals true. I'm going to separate that out. So TRUE, karyotic nucleus, true nucleus. In this case, we can say EU equals true, meaning that eukaryotic cells do have a nucleus. So you can see in our eukaryotic cells here, we have them about 10 to 100 nanometers. And you can see right in the middle over here, you can see all of our genetic information here. And you can see represented by these dashes over here, that this is going to be our nucleus. So again, pro, no, meaning that we have no nucleus. And then EU true, meaning that we have a nucleus over here. So not only is a size going to differentiate between them, but one of the major factors is going to be that nucleus over here. So again, prokaryotic cells, no. Eukaryotic cells, true. So this right here is going to kind of show you the scale of exactly what those prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells are going to look like. So again, we went ahead and covered atoms, and we know they're going to be the base unit. So in this case, it can be incredibly tiny. And you can see over here, this is going to be at a magnitude of 10. So they are going to get exponentially larger. So our atoms, again, one of the basic foundational pieces. So they're going to be very, very tiny. Then we go to our lipids, proteins. Our flu viruses, or in this case, just viruses in general, are going to be very, very tiny. So in this case, they're going to be super tiny. And then now we get to our 1 nanometer. You can see our bacteria. And then you can see in the middle over here, this is all of our genetic material. We don't have a nucleus. So in this case, our bacteria are going to be prokaryotic because there is no nucleus. You'll also notice that the mitochondria, which you might have heard in high school, mitochondria being the powerhouse of the cell, is also 1 nanometer. So this is actually going to be important later on. So we'll start that to kind of remember it as we move forward. Once we get to the 10 to 100 nanometers, you'll notice that our plant animal cells now are going to appear. And remember, these are going to be our eukaryotic cells. So EU equals true. So these are going to have a nucleus, and you can see those nucleuses about right over here. And then we're going to use these to continue to build upon things. And then we're going to go ahead and remember the levels of organization. Those cells are going to build tissues, tissues, organs, organs, organisms, and then organisms to people. So you can see human egg cells. And then as we move forward and forward, we can get all the way up to a person. So you can see prokaryotic cells are about 10 to 100 times smaller than eukaryotic cells. And you can just kind of see because it's going to have kind of less stuff in the middle versus over here, the plant animal cells are going to have many organelles within themselves. So this is going to go to our first kind of test your knowledge. So like always, what I'm going to do is give everybody a couple seconds to pause this video, and then we'll go ahead and look over some of the answers. All right, welcome back. So this is what you should have seen. Number one, organisms that are made of prokaryotic cells are called prokaryotics, like bacteria, like all bacteria are prokaryotes. Remember, pro, so PRO equals no, meaning that there is not going to be a nucleus. Organisms that are made of eukaryotic cells are called eukaryotes. Remember, EU equals true. So in this case, they are going to have a nucleus. Which of the following statements are true? In this case, organs are composed of tissues. Remember, levels of organization. And then all bacteria are going to be unicellular. Remember, uni like unicycle. Only one wheel is only going to be one cell. Based on cell theory, which of the following organisms is not technically living? So remember, in order to be alive, you need to be comprised of one cell. And in this case, based upon our last lecture, remember, viruses are going to be made out of proteins and genetic information, or in this case, DNA, their DNA. So in this case, they don't have anything else in them. They're essentially just carriers for genetic information. So in this case, they do not have cells, so they are not going to be considered alive. All right, so let's go ahead and continue. Eukaryotic, prokaryotic cells are going to have a couple things that are going to be in common. So looking at this over here, I'm just going to go ahead and show you all four of them. The first one is going to be a cell membrane, or also known as a plasma membrane. And what that's going to do is it's going to separate the cell's interior from the environment. So in this case, you can see over here, this is just going to be kind of a generic cell in order to help us with our comparison. And you can see that our cell membrane, which is going to be kind of on the inner side, try my best to outline that, is going to help separate, again, the cell's interior from the environment. Both of these cells are also going to have a cytoplasm. A cytoplasm is going to be this kind of jelly substance in the middle. And this is where a lot of organelles can be suspended in eukaryotic cells. And this is where our genetic material is going to be suspended, in this case for prokaryotes. DNA, genetic information, is going to be found right in the middle. And then our ribosomes are going to help synthesize proteins. So both of these are going to have a ribosome to help accomplish that. So now that we've seen the commonalities between the two, what we're going to do now is we're going to look at the basic characteristics of our prokaryotics. Again, remember, pro equals no. So in this case, they do not have a nucleus. So looking at this over here, organisms in the domain archaea and bacteria are going to be prokaryotes. So in this case, again, they are not going to consider themselves to have a nucleus. So prokaryotes are going to lack membranes enclosing internal components. Again, remember, they are not going to have a nucleus. And you can see this over here. All of that DNA or genetic information is going to be surrounded or floating in the cytoplasm. Okay. One thing that I do want to kind of make a point of is many prokaryotes do not have a flagella or capsule. So in this case, you can see that we have this right here, which is going to be the flagellum, and that's a tail. So not every single prokaryote is going to have a tail that help them move around. Again, some of them might be round, some of them might have different shapes. Again, in this case, they're not always going to have them. And then the capsule, which is just going to be the outer portion, they're not always going to have that. So again, many prokaryotes do not have a flagella or a capsule. All right, let's go and take a look at the basic characteristics of eukaryotes. So there are many different types of organisms that are eukaryotes. Again, we have our animals, and this is going to include humans. So one thing some students kind of get confused is when they think animals, they just assume, okay, animals as in like dogs, cats, let's say rabbits, things like that. But we are going to be considered in that category. Plants are also going to be a part of that, and fungi. And you can see over here on our phylogenetic tree, you can see once we go over here and branch off here and then branch off to this side, these are going to all be our eukaryotes right here. And you can see animals, or in this case us, are going to be right over here. But again, you can see that fungi, plants, all of these are also going to be considered eukaryotes as well, because again, remember EU equals true. They are going to have a true nucleus. Now, eukaryotic animals and plant cells can differ. However, they are going to contain organelles. So these organelles are going to do many, many different things in order to help facilitate the health of the cell. So let's go ahead and take a look at some unique features of these eukaryotic cells. So organelles are membrane sacs found within all eukaryotic cells. So in this case, they're going to have specialized components. So again, once we're looking at these, They're all going to be specialized, meaning that they're all going to kind of have a specific function in order to help kind of facilitate the health of the cell. Now, all eukaryotic cells have many of these same organelles, no matter the overall function. So again, there are going to be many, many different pieces within these cells, which are going to help, again, help facilitate the health of the cell. Now, a thing that's going to be important is prokaryotic cells do not have organisms. I'm sorry, organelles. Remember, all they're going to basically have is going to be that cell wall, cell membrane. They're going to have the cytoplasm, and then they're also going to have the ribosomes just to produce proteins. In this case, when it comes to eukaryotic cells, they are going to have many more organelles in order to help facilitate many, many different processes. So this is what a typical eukaryotic cell is going to look like for animals. You can see that we have a mitochondria. Again, if you can think back to high school, this is going to be the powerhouse of the cell because it is going to produce our ATP. Our plasma membrane, or in this case, our cell membrane, remember separating or making that barrier between the inside and outside. We have cytoskeletons, centrioles, lysosomes, the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. We have ribosomes here, rough ER, the nucleus, and then remember within our nucleus, we're going to have our nuclear membrane, nucleolus, and then our nucleoplasm, Golgi apparatuses, and things like that. Again, these are all going to be very, very specific and important to not only maintaining the health of the cell, but in this case, when we're looking at things like the centrioles, they're going to help with cell division when we're going from one cell to two cells. So, important thing is animal and plant cells are both going to be considered our eukaryotic cells, and they are going to contain many of the same organelles. There are going to be some slight differences, just because again, they're going to be two different kind of types of cells. But again, the majority of the organelles are going to be shared. And one of the things I do want to point out with the differences is where is it, cell wall, right here. And you can notice that this is going to be much more rigid, unlike the cell membrane right over here, which is what animal cells have. You can see that the shape is going to be much more circular. When it comes to plant cells, they are going to have a cell wall. So that is going to be unique to them, and they are going to be much more rigid. This is what helps plants maintain their kind of shape. And they are going to have also a cell membrane as well, or in this case, a plasma membrane. Now, one thing that's going to be different is a vacuole. So in the vacuole, what's going to happen here is this is going to be a big kind of fluid sac. And this is unique to plant cells only. So it's going to be filled with cell sap that maintains pressure against the cell wall, again, helping maintain its shape. The other thing it's going to have that's going to be unique to itself is going to be the cytoplasm. So you can see that not only do plant cells have a mitochondria, but they're also going to have a cytoplasm. And this right here is going to help with photosynthesis. It's going to go ahead and take water, H2O, plus CO2, plus light, and it's going to go ahead and produce O2 and carbohydrates, C6H12O6. Okay, so one of the things I want you to go ahead and give a try is I want you to go ahead and see, using the textbook, is I want you to go ahead and see if you can find the eukaryotic cells and prokaryotic cells and their functions. So go ahead and take a moment and see if you can define their cell components, figure out their functions, which ones are present in prokaryotics, which ones are present in eukaryotic plant cells, and then which ones are present in eukaryotic animal cells. All right, let's go ahead and continue. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and move on to our test your knowledge portion. I'm going to go ahead and give everybody about 5 seconds to go ahead and do the first one and then the second one. First one being labeling components of this cell. So see if you can recognize what type of cell this is going to be, and then see if you can recognize all of the individual components. All right, welcome back, and let's go ahead and check this out. So when it comes to this one, looking at this over here, we're going to go ahead and try to see if we can identify all of the different pieces that have to do with this prokaryotic cell. Remember, pro equals no, meaning we do not have a nucleus. So that should have been a giveaway here. You can see we have our genetic material here, and we don't have anything encasing it. So it is not going to be a eukaryotic cell. Now, when it comes to this, as long as you're able to identify some of the four major things, then you should be completely okay. One of the first one is going to be our genetic material, which is going to be DNA right over here. Our next one is going to be our cell membrane, but an M for membrane. We also have our cytoplasm. And then finally, we have our ribosomes. So those are going to be some of the four major components when it comes to our prokaryotic cells. All right. So the next thing we're going to kind of look at is the evolution of prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. So our first prokaryotic cells appeared on our planet about 3.8 billion years ago. And then our first eukaryotic cell appeared about 2.7 billion years ago. So remember, prokaryotics were first. Pro equals no. Remember, no true nucleus. And then our eukaryotic EU equals true, meaning that they do have a nucleus. Now, one of the things that we need to talk about when it comes to these two is something known as endosymbiotic theory. And this is to explain the relationship between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells, specifically within their developments. Now, looking at this over here, this is going to be the entire theory. Now, if you can think back to the beginning of the lecture where we were looking at the sizes, and I mentioned that the mitochondria and our prokaryotic cells look very, very similar in size, this is where that's going to kind of come into play. So looking at this over here, we have our prokaryotic cell, because again, you can see we don't have a nucleus. And then over time, we went ahead and kind of developed that with our endoplasmic reticulum, or our ERs. And this part right here is going to be something that's going to be really important. This is going to be known as our endosymbiotic event. And essentially what happened here is in early eukaryotic cells consumed a photosynthetic bacteria that involved in the chloroplast, right, over here. So they both went ahead and they, right here, again, first symbiotic event, consumed an aerobic bacteria evolving into our mitochondria. So what happened is we went ahead and consumed or took in a mitochondria, so that went inside. Once that happened, we branched off into two parts. The first part is they went ahead and took in another bacteria, which again was our chloroplast, and this was going to give us our modern day plant cells, because you can see we have our mitochondria as well as our chloroplast. And then the ones that didn't ended up becoming a modern day animal cell. So again, to kind of sum everything up, prokaryotic cell started to kind of develop into our eukaryotic cell. We went ahead and we created a nucleus, endoplasmic reticulum. And then what happened here, as we got bigger, we went ahead and took in a mitochondria, and that gave us our modern day animal cells. As we took one of these in, a separate set of separate set of cells took in our chloroplast. So now we had the mitochondria and our chloroplast, giving us our modern day plant cells. All right, and that is going to go ahead and conclude our lecture. As always, if you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out, and I will see you in the next one.